I better shut.
Good morning.
Morning.
Hey, good morning, Chip.
Morning, everybody.
Morning, Hugh.
Oh, you did it. I
Did
thought,
what?
huh?
Did what?
You're here. No, I thought you were traveling.
No, we left early.
Okay, thank you.
You know, it was only Provincetown on the beach, but you know, what's a big deal?
You can always do that. Thanks so much. Miranda, I see you there. Good morning. Paul, Chip, we said hello. John Schobel?
He should be coming on.
Okay, let's just wait a minute and we'll call the meeting to order. I want to have John on, and I know that Jeremy's away. So that is what it is. Let's give John another minute or two. What is happening? Call John Schobel.
There he is.
Cool. You're on. Thanks, John. We're trying to wait for a bit. Terrific. It's 10:02. Meeting's called to order. Thanks, everybody. We do have a quorum, and we should be good to go. Let me just frame a couple bits before we ask the applicant to go into presentation. There was a interesting and detailed piece in Gossips the other day talking about some of the content of what we're going to be talking about today, and kind of leading with the demo because it's got some drama to it. The real purpose of the meeting is for us, the commission, to follow our regular process, which is a two-step process of getting to a complete application. And from that complete application, we have an opportunity to vote on a certificate of appropriateness as per Chapter 169. Although the applicant has presented once or twice, whatever before, giving us the broad concept and then more specifics, we've also discussed specifics of facade and so on the building, et cetera. At no point did we vote that the application was complete. And in fact, it is not complete, which is why we're here today. Two areas were identified by both the applicant and the commission that needed to be filled in to have an actual complete application. I'll start a little bit backwards. Second being the finishes and detail of the facade of the building, structural implications of that, and then obviously what would come out of that once we have that level of detail would be a discussion of the appropriateness of the solution to the building, to the neighborhood, to Hudson, et cetera. The second area that was a gap in our information, and a gap that is required that we fill in, which is understanding demo in this case. And it's not just a matter of being informed that there needed to be demo to fulfill this particular solution in the space it was proposed for. We actually have to know more, both for the record and for our own deliberation. It's not just about what's coming up, it's what's going down. The applicant did send notice, if you will, of the demo in two separate instances. One was a letter from Walter Chatham, and the other is a section or paragraph or two in the application itself. In both cases, the reference was to a single structure. There are actually two structures. There's a residential structure and what has been identified in some, but not all records as an ice house. Not the point. No problem that it was missed, because we're going to fill that gap, and we're going to find out about what's coming down. We're not entertaining any motion that is specifically a demo motion. In my reading of the code, and Victoria, interrupt me, there basically is no such thing. What demo has to be considered not as a solo event, but in the context of what's being built. Given that requirement in the code, I think that the sequencing has actually been very good. We have a good concept, but an incomplete one of what's going to be built, which gives us a framework to consider the demo in terms of public good, if you will, but also is it compliant with 169, and are we fulfilling our duty? Third area was, I know the applicant has referred to SHPO and mentioned some of the SHPO decisions or observations from SHPO, which I've got in front of me, and it's referred to very clearly. What I'm getting from this, and we can talk about it as the meeting goes on, this should be a give and take, is not that SHPO quote unquote approved. What SHPO said that they did not object or would not object to the demo under certain circumstances, that being the deemed compatibility, importance, and relevance of what was being built. So they ain't so different from us. It's a holistic thought. You've got to know what's coming down. You got to know what's coming up, and you have to evaluate it. One more point, and I will shut up. Victoria, Attorney Polidoro has advised that this is not a public hearing. I know I can see a lot of folks online. The commission is not obligated to take public comment in this meeting, and there's a ton of work to get done today. I really would love to see how far we can get towards a complete application. Nonetheless, at some point after everybody's presented, we've had some deliberation. I'm thinking that we can invite people to speak a bit. I think it's always worth it. I know that people are interested in and often have valuable thoughts and information to add. But I ask everybody to be chill for a bit. There's a ton of work to do, and let's get our work done. That's my story. Thank you. And I would ask the applicant to open up with however they want to present today.
Thank you, Phil. We've got our team here to discuss the buildings on the site, the alternatives analysis that we produced and submitted to SHPO, and the SHPO findings. That's Beth Seelig. She's the one who wrote the alternatives analysis for us. We also have Walter here, who's going to talk about the overall design strategy of the two buildings and some of the architectural references that he's incorporated in the overall design. Then we have Jason Anderson, who's here. He's the lead architect for the building 708 State. We're now calling 76 North 7th. on the warehouse side, the east side of North 7th Street. He's here to present the materials that we've selected for that exterior. And then we have George Chang from Urban Architectural Initiatives, who is here to discuss 75 North 7th, which is the building on the west side of the street, as well as the exciting passive house energy efficient features that we are incorporating in that building as part of our $1 million Buildings of Excellence Award from NYSERDA, which is really designed to push new construction buildings in particular into a climate change conscious future. So at that, I would like to turn it.
Dan, let me interrupt. I've seen the address in different contexts as either 75 or 76, and I also get a little bit confused about some of the other. What address are we? What specific address? And what is the specific application for what address going forward? So we have that on the record.
Yeah, the address. So the application is for 2 addresses. One of them is technically 65-75 North 7th. That is basically the lot on the west side of North 7th from the alley up to the firehouse. That is the 75 unit mixed income building that is also a passive house energy efficient design. The other building under consideration is the current legal address is 708 State. That's the east side of North 7th. Also new construction building, mixed income. It has primarily market rate in that building, but it has 63 units and ground floor commercial as well. So those are the 2 buildings that we are here to get a certificate of appropriateness for.
Thanks very much, Dan.
And I understand there have been some questions and debate as to whether or not the 708 State side of the street is really within the historic district or not. In our view, we want to get the input and the C of A from the Historic Preservation Commission. We want to make sure that both of the buildings are complementary to each other. So we're kind of setting that aside and just, we welcome your input and feedback, and we want to make sure that it reflects your expertise.
Victoria, any comments or observations on the status of our authority over both these addresses?
Where are the 2 houses that are listed on the National Register?
The house and the shed are on 65-67 North 7th. So it's the west side of the street.
Okay. I mean, I think it's tough because, as you mentioned, the certificate of appropriateness here is for a mixed bag of demolition and replacing it with buildings in place. And so you're sort of looking at the whole context of the project.
Right.
And, I think there's an argument that your jurisdiction is limited just to the one side where the buildings are coming down and being replaced by this. But again, like Shippo did, you really have to look at the whole project in order to decide whether it's appropriate or not.
Thanks, Victoria. Craig, could I ask you one question?
Really two separate.
Yes, yep.
In your view, where are we in terms of material that's been provided to you to try to move this project forward and get as close as we possible to finding the application complete? We've identified the demo aspect of it. The applicant is going to present materials and further construction details. Where are you in terms of what you've had a chance to review, and what might be the other gaps that we need to fill that maybe we could address today?
There has been nothing as far as construction plans or materials or anything of that nature submitted to me, other than the brewery at 708 State. Everything else is still in the design phase, I guess. I think that's, maybe Dan can chime in on that, but we haven't gotten anything as far as code construction documents for review yet.
Thanks very much, Craig. Dan,
As
you
a point of
understand?
clarification,
Yeah.
does the Preservation Commission require submission of construction documents to deem an application complete? Thinking back at our previous submissions for C of As, usually it's just elevations with proposed materials. Is more required?
Well, the materials is required in the design phase. I mean, the construction documents to be for code review isn't 100%, but the materials, the elevations, the design, the windows, the siding, the doors, the roofing material, all that stuff has to be presented to the Historic Commission. And of course, we need to see it, but it's really about the material and the design of the exterior part of the building within the district.
Okay.
Okay?
So as long as the application has elevation drawings with materials indicated, that should be the makings of a complete application.
That would meet the guidelines of the city code for the
Okay.
historic preservation district, yes.
Okay, thank you.
One more point on at least in my view, what constitutes our process is that Craig has to have an opportunity to review everything that gets to us from the point of view of code enforcement, fire, health, safety, etc. So I'm not, he hasn't had that opportunity. I just want you to understand that typically the application on a normal process, and you guys have done a bunch, goes to code enforcement, and I don't put it onto the agenda until I get it from Craig, that he has reviewed it. And I know he's reviewed it because he sends it to me and we share it with the commission.
And just to add to that, Dan, what Phil's talking about is, for example, the windows, the windows going into the residential structure, do they meet the code? Are they the right size? Do they meet the minimum size? Same way with doors, egress systems, things like that. That all has to go through a code review before we send it out to our regulatory boards, because if it doesn't meet code, we don't waste their time looking at something they can't approve in the first place. I think that, that's what we need to see. And again, it doesn't have to get into detail other than this is the material, this is the size, and this is where it's going on the building. And for example, we would look at it and say, okay, you're proposing a window. What is that window serving? Is that window serving a sleeping area? And if it is, it has to be a certain size. Once we get past that, I can go to the commission and say, okay, everything they presented to me is in the guidelines and approval of the building code. And then they do their thing and you go forward from there.
Okay.
Thanks very much, Craig. Just a quick process note, commissioners, if you could stay on camera, it would be helpful for us tracking what's going on. And Dan, for your folks who are speaking, we don't have a secretary for the commission in this meeting, so we're going to use the audio recording. I don't want to put an unfair burden on folks, but I would ask that from time to time they state their names. It makes it so much easier when you're trying to transcribe. Just a detail, but it helps.
Sure.
Okay, back to you, Dan.
All right, so I think everyone's interested to hear about the alternatives analysis and SHPO review. So I'd like to start with Beth Seelig to just give an overview of the extensive report that she produced and which was subsequently approved by SHPO.
Thank you, Dan. For the record, Beth Seelig, Hudson Cultural Services, formerly known as Hudson Valley Cultural Resource Consultants. We changed our name in January of this year. I've been working with Dan for a while. The project was initially submitted to the SHPO for its review. They responded with a letter stating their concerns regarding the project and its relationship to the National Register listed district, and also their concerns relating to the demolition of the 6567 North 7th Street residence, which is listed in the district. As part of that initial review process, they did ask for the alternatives analysis. And the goal of the alternatives analysis is really to explore whether or not there are any practical or prudent alternatives to retain the building and to avoid demolition and significant adverse impact. The alternatives analysis looked at ways that this building might be able to be incorporated into the proposed Galvin plan, and what could be done in terms of creating it as a standalone setting for adaptive reuse. Ultimately, the results of the alternatives analysis revealed that the project that is being proposed by Galvin would not be able to incorporate the 6567 North Street building into its project, given the limitations of that existing building and just given the layout of the proposed project and the overall goals of the project. In preparation for this meeting, I did a little bit of additional background research that I'd like to just take a minute to share with you. I took a look at the historic Sanborn fire insurance maps, and these maps indicate that prior to 1895, the structure at 6567 North 7th Street was not there. It was not present when those maps were drafted. By 1903, that residence is there. It's shown as a dwelling, and in the back of the dwelling, it shows a stable or barn and a shed, a one-story shed and a two-story stable and barn. And by 1911, the shed is shown as a wagon shop, and the barn is still present. The barn that is shown on those maps is in the present location of that ancillary structure that's currently on that parcel, in that back corner of the parcel. It appears to have most recently been used as a garage. But it, since its inception, was built as a stable or barn.
Miss
know,
Shelley, are you able to put the maps up so we can see?
If you'll let me share my screen, I will do what I can.
Thank you.
You betcha. So this is 1911. Let me just back up a little or move forward. Hold on. So this is the 1895 Sanborn fire insurance map, and our dwelling would be right here. This is where Rope Alley later shows up, right behind this shed and this outbuilding. If I can move the zoom, I can advance. This is, oh, pardon me. I have too many windows open. I apologize. This is 1903. And you can see that Rope Alley has been constructed behind that small barn and those little outbuildings. This is our dwelling that we were talking about. The one-story shed is here. And then that 2.5-story barn and stable that is still currently on the parcel. And if we advance to 1911, that's not my clean version, bear with me.
Hey, Beth, my screen is not changing unless it's me. Is everyone else seeing the different maps?
Still on the first one.
Yeah, we're stuck on the first map, Beth.
It says I'm screen sharing, so let me stop and restart. Okay, it says that you can all now see it. Do you see one where it says Rope Alley coming up North 7th?
Yes, we can see that.
Okay.
See
So-
the one from 1895?
Go back to 1895? Sure, I will. I'm going to stop and start again just because that seems to be how we make it work. This here is 1895 coming up. Everybody can see it? So Rope Alley runs right, can you see my cursor moving?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Rope Alley runs right here behind this small 2-story shed. And as you can see, the dwelling we're talking about is not present in 1895. And then if we go to 1903, this is the fire stamp. And these maps, for your reference, I retrieved them from the Library of Congress's digital archives. So they are available on the internet through the Library of Congress. And you can see here we have Rope Alley has been constructed in 1903. This here is a 2-story barn or stable. The X that goes through the box there, that's the Sanborn key for indicating a barn or stable. That's a standardized key that they used on all their maps. And here they've designated a 1-story shed that is no longer present. And then the last one I'll put up is the 1911. And again, you can see Rope Alley is here. The shed has been relabeled as a wagon house, probably kept where they stored their wagons and things. You can see our dwelling in question here. And this here is the barn and stable that's still, it's in the same location as the outbuilding that's currently in that parcel that's currently there. And I know that the National Register nomination form for the historic district indicates that there was an ice house behind the 67 North 7th Street. However, there's nothing there to indicate that this was ever used as an ice house. It was constructed out of wood frame. The Sanborn maps indicate that it was a barn or an outbuilding. And it also doesn't have the architectural or engineering criteria to have served as an ice house. Prior to 1912, you didn't have refrigeration. There was no way to keep things cool. So they would build ice houses primarily below grade so that the natural coolness of the earth would help insulate and keep the ice from melting in the warmer temperatures. So those are the things I just wanted to highlight. One of the things that has come out of the SHPO's review of the alternatives analysis is that they requested that a memorandum of agreement be developed to mitigate the adverse effects of the demolition of this building. And that is a process we are still working through with the SHPO and with Galvin Foundation to get those details coordinated to finalize that part of the review. And that's all I have for today. Thank you. Dan?
Beth, could you comment just one more second
Absolutely.
on what I'm not understanding, what your understanding is of mitigate the effects of?
So in New York State, when we reach the point where we are taking down a historic building, there's always something put in place to offset that loss. Usually what I end up doing is what the New York State requires rather is a structure documentation report, which photographs the building inside and out, includes a sketch of the floor plan, includes a detailed history of the building. And that document gets submitted not only to the SHPO, but to a local historic repository, as well as the New York State Archives, so that there's a record of the building into perpetuity. Another item that usually goes into an MOA is some sort of exhibit that makes the public aware of what the building's history is, what was there on the property at the time. If you were, taking down a historic mill because it's, for whatever reason, you'd have, a little exhibit. We see these all the time in national parks that get put up in a publicly accessible location so that visitors to the property can read about and understand and know the history of what happened there. Other things include creating photo exhibits to be, in the, let's say if a hotel is going up, a photo exhibit would be in the lobby of the hotel. I've had clients put together art exhibitions using, pieces of salvaged items from the building that's come down. We are also required as part of these mitigation strategies to offer architectural elements to historic restoration companies, as salvage, to let a historic restoration come in and take period items that then can be used in rehabilitation of other historic resources.
Beth, when you provide all that stuff to SHPO, what do you get back from them?
They usually comment and they weigh in and ask for either additional things as part of those mitigation strategies. For example, one project I'm working on where they are rehabilitating an 1830s mansion house, the SHPO has asked to see all the plans for improvements and maintenance as part of the process. So we submit a draft of the MOA and the mitigation strategies, and the SHPO will comment as they deem appropriate. And sometimes it warrants conversations with the team, and sometimes everybody's acceptable with what's being discussed.
Victoria, does SHPO have authority over local preservation commissions such as ourselves?
No. Their decision is not binding on you, but they are considered to be experts.
Understood.
And yeah,
Beth, I have a question. In the application, there's a sentence that is, I think, was in bold. It says that the design features of keeping the structure may not be feasible. They're referring to the demo and saying it may not be feasible to keep the historic structure. And the design features of the new structure may reduce the overall impact in the surrounding area proposed. I'm not quite sure what that means.
I will say that, in terms of the design feature impacting the area, there's, and perhaps Mr. Chatham can speak to that a little more, there are a number of ways an architectural design can reduce the impression of overall massing or the impression of having a building there. Some of the techniques I'm familiar with are, the color of the exterior of the building, the type and orientation of siding, the strategic, placement of bays on the building, articulating the exterior fabric, are ways that just reduce that overall impression of, oh my goodness, there's a huge building here.
Beth, what would compatibility be? I mean, compatibility is one of the major drivers in 169. Would that be part of that consideration as well?
Yes.
Is the new structure compatible with the Hudson environment?
Yes, I have not, to be perfectly honest, seen the most recent elevation drawings for the building, but when I did do the alternatives analysis, the design at the time, was compatible with the architecture of the surrounding neighborhood.
Just for a little context, before the initial feedback we got from SHPO, some of you may remember our first design for this building featured a rather dramatic green wall on the south side of the building. SHPO advised that that was not compatible. So that's part of what brought us to bring Walter on and propose the current design for the building.
Great, thank you. Okay. Who's next?
Excuse me, could I just ask Beth about the alternative development analysis? That presentation made to SHPO, did that include alternative architectural design? Did it include alternative economic designs or economic analysis? What's the hinge point of in the alternative development analysis? What's the hinge point that tips this toward what the current application is proposing?
So the alternatives analysis, as I said before, the goal is to determine whether or not there are any practical or prudent alternatives. And so there are a couple of things that sort of go into that. Finance is definitely one of them. And there's definitely a discussion of that in the alternatives analysis report of the financial implications of retaining the building versus demolition, and changing the overall scale of the building and the impact to that, and how the public funding is going to be best utilized. I think that in this point, we discussed the changes and of the exterior architecture and the compatibility of the current plan, as it differed from the previous plan that was submitted to SHPO, as Dan mentioned, with the green wall and the original design. The focus was on how we've changed it to make it more compatible, to reduce that impact of massing and visual impact of scale.
Is that analysis a written report, a document that could be shared with the commission?
It's in the alternatives analysis that we put together.
This was in our initial application.
It was submitted a long time ago.
Was it submitted, when you say, Walter, I guess that was Walter said it was a long time ago. I don't recall having seen that. When was it submitted to the HPC?
I'll have to look back at my records as to the exact date, but I believe it would have been in January, ahead of our initial February 11 presentation in which I made reference to the analysis.
So that's January of this year,
Correct.
2022.
So January 12 and January 14 are the dates that I identified for both the submission and then our record of that on the meeting of the 14th. It appears, but I never did see an old, well, we'll figure it out and get a hold of it, right?
Yeah.
I don't know that we've seen it.
I don't recall it either, but things happen. If we could get that soon, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
I just, and aside from the applicant, I think in terms of the commission, I think it's important that we have this kind of documentation for purposes of evaluating demolition
Sure.
as a procedure for us for all demolition.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Just one thing to note that Beth didn't mention, one of the really critical elements of the alternatives analysis was looking at whether or not the goals of the project could be achieved while retaining the two structures on the site or the house on the site. And our analysis determined it would not be possible to move forward with this type of project. In order to develop a mixed income building like this, you need a certain level of scale. This is a 75 unit building. If we were to try to keep that house and not demo it, the most we would be able to get is about 35 units, which would not be financeable. It would not be practical as a development. It would essentially, make it impossible for us to move forward with this type of project on that site, which, we've really proposed in an effort to address the extreme challenges with housing affordability in the city of Hudson.
Understood, Dan. Thank you for that comment. The distinction between, in your analysis, 75 units versus 35 units is that kind of hinge point that I was asking about before as to where does this break? Where does this substance come to making a decision about whether this project is viable or not? And you've stated that it's 75 versus 35 units.
That's right. Yeah, George Chang from Urban Architectural Analysis did the analysis for us there. So that is the hinge point.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Sure.
And thank you, Beth, for the use of the insurance maps. It's really super helpful.
Yes. And again, if it's helpful for me to send those to Dan to have them, submitted all to you as, JPEGs, after this meeting, I can certainly make sure that happens.
That would be great as soon as you can. I think part of what might have happened is that you guys were presenting to planning and ourselves kind of simultaneously. So we'll get everything together.
Okay, I'll get those over to them.
Great. Thank you, Beth. So now I'm going to turn it over to Walter. I know he's already kind of given this overview before, but I think it's useful as we go into Jason and George's presentations on materials to set the stage for what we're trying to accomplish in the Depot District. So Walter, can you talk about what inspired these two buildings?
Of course. So I will have to share my screen to do that. Can I do that now?
Sure.
Okay. Sorry, I always have trouble finding. Here we go. So can you all see this, my screen with now? Okay, great. I think I'm getting better at this. So I don't want to have to go over any territory that you all feel we've been over. I was a little surprised to hear that exchange about the SHPO analysis, because I think that was originally submitted over a year ago, and maybe at the time we were told it wasn't necessary to go before you all. So I would just like to say that if you all have never seen the SHPO analysis before today and didn't know that all this had been done, I apologize, because a lot of my reactions recently have been based on the idea that you all had not responded correctly to material you were given. If you were not given, I apologize and am happy to start on this footing of let's go forward with a mutual understanding. So going way back, I think you all remember the last meeting or two, I showed some images that were meant to show how this all fits into a context within the neighborhood. You know, our contention that there are similar massed buildings either extant or in the past in this area, combined with the fact that this is really the only area in Hudson because of the zoning where this type of building can occur, we feel makes a very good cogent point for putting the buildings here. And so with respect to the former idea that we're trying to make a complex that at least we would hope would be accepted and fit into the overall historic look and context of Hudson. So we want to make the project itself work within its own context. So this is just a little bit of a not very great, but updated attempt to show you all a rendering that takes the last set of comments that I had been given before the demolition issue came up, and we were talking about facades and how to improve them. A number of members made very constructive suggestions, and we've taken all of those that we could and tried to implement them. I'd like to apologize because my storefronts in this rendering look very flat. The windows look very flat. That is not an architectural statement or an intention. This is more to show you how the building massing and the coloring, that's the central fire station and the flagpole of the central fire station down there at the end, hopefully will create what I keep talking about, a kind of street scene that, okay, people who are sophisticated will know it hasn't been there for 100 years, but our intention is to do no harm and to come up with a way to develop the massing on these buildings and develop the details so that they look to the average person as if they belong. And then, you know, we can be critiqued on how well or how poorly we've done that. And I just want to very quickly address a general comment about what we're doing here, because a negative attitude about this will say, well, you're just, you know, making something up or trying to pretend something that was there wasn't there, that was there, whatever. So much of what has happened in Hudson over the last 100 years, especially in the 20th century, is people who cared trying to preserve at least the shapes and the materials of the buildings. And I'm not going to go on about this, but I think you all can make a judgment, and I'm going to stop defending this project. But the thing that I'm most upset about in Hudson right now is the proposal for a building next to 400 State Street that I'm sure you all know, that has nothing to do with 400 State Street. It has nothing to do with Hudson, and there's not a thing you can do about it. So we're here to try and produce the antithesis to that and look for ways to move forward, because there are going to be bigger buildings and you're going to be upset every time the scale of a neighborhood changes. I am too. But the question is, what are we going to do about it? So with that, I would say that this drawing attempts to show an ensemble on both sides of the street. The depot would be just to the right of this picture up the alley. And so you see, we've broken it down as we were asked to do in a number of ways. The storefronts have been varied. We've introduced awnings and a number of elements that we believe we were asked to do. We've worked hard to try and get the colors and the colors of the materials to work. And the architects of the buildings themselves are going to talk about the materials. I will only talk about the attempt in a building like this, which, if you look at the windows, is very clearly could be a big box with a flat roof. Hopefully it doesn't look like that to the average person. And hopefully, you know, listening to what Chip said, I have tried to get the scale of these storefronts to come down, and hopefully they no longer look like they belong in the Far Rockaways, but in Hudson. I believe we've, if we haven't submitted these to you in electronic form, we will. And so you can study them at your leisure. But sorry, I don't want to go through too quickly, but I want to cover a lot. This is number 75. So this is the building that's going to have the high energy efficiency, and George Chang is going to talk about how he's going to achieve that. For my role, I've tried to break up the storefronts as we were suggested to do, introduce signage and other elements that are appropriate to Hudson, and hopefully, apropos a comment that was made, a very good comment about, do we have construction details? Well, no, we have to get your approval. We have to figure out what we actually get permission to build before we can do those. So we're very anxious to please you, and we're working very hard to do it. And hopefully your hard work will make this worth building in Hudson, and everybody will be satisfied, and the needed housing that is so desperately needed will be provided. So that is the 75 deck. And then this is number 76. This is the elevation from North 7th Street. Someone asked last week, I won't say who, is it handsome? I've been looking in the mirror every day since then, and I can't answer that question. But I have tried to make this handsome.
Walter?
Yes.
It's Phil. The buildings are, we're being asked to review the buildings simultaneously, both of these structures?
Well, no.
Because Dan said he was seeking a C of A that covered both.
Well, okay, that's whatever you want to do. My goal here, I'm not going to tell anybody what to do. My goal is to present as clearly as I can where the Imagineering aspect of this design is, to try and get it to be compatible in terms of the general look and feel with Hudson. And so I guess, I don't know if you remember, we showed you a whole series of 3D studies of the whole neighborhood and how I had this destroyer screen of buildings and so forth. And then we got in trouble with planning because they said we were thinking about doing things that weren't on the planning drawings. But really the intention is to build some big buildings that don't look like they were built yesterday, and then to surround them eventually with landscaping and improvements. And I do want to say, if you've looked at our site plan and you remember that Sanborn map that Beth showed, our site plan for the building I'm looking at here, the back of it actually cuts off. So we will preserve that visual corridor of the rail line. And anyone who's been up to the depot in the last week will see we've opened a tremendous area, part of which will be construction staging for this building. And hopefully we'll have a little northern dispensary type building on it in the future. But, we just want to work with you all to make a charming neighborhood and provide some very much needed housing. So I'm going to turn it over to the other architects now and let them tell you how we hope to achieve that architecturally, and then we can discuss it.
Thanks, Walter.
Great. So
Walter,
Jason,
excuse me, before you turn it over, because these drawings that you have are useful, and I have a question about the first image that you showed was a 3D sketch looking down 7th Street. So in this drawing, we're seeing the first 3 stories on the left-hand side of on the left-hand side is building number 6567. Correct?
Yeah, correct.
And there are 3 stories of red brick, and then there are 2 stories of a buff color or an orange color brick above that. Is that correct?
So let me go to that elevation, and I apologize. That perspective was specifically produced to create an image of the street, because that was what we were discussing last time. So getting back out to the macro view, if you look at the center section, Chip, the best thing I can say is the center section somewhat mirrors the building across the street. There are 3 clear stories and then a mansard, right? So 4th floor. Yeah. In this building that we're looking at, obviously that reads as 4 full floors and then a roof. And one reason for that is if you look at the, I guess the left side of both of those pediments are useful. And then the center section, we're putting solar panels on it. So we've tried to kind of, work that into the whole mix and make it as appropriate as possible.
I see. So in this image that the commission is looking at now, the building is 5 stories, it's always, it's 5 stories with the first floor being the storefronts that are facing 7th Street. And then there are 4 stories of housing above that.
I agree with
That's
that.
right.
Correct. And so in this elevation on 7th Street, as you've explained before, you've modeled this to the appearance, I think, more successfully than on the opposite side of the street of 3 bays or 3 buildings, three masses, if you will. And I want the commission to understand that the center section of this is set back from the 2 gable ends of the left and the right-hand side. How far back is that? That setback is illustrated accurately here in that is the storefront also set back, not as far back as the apartment block, but is that the design intention?
I'm going to let George tell you where that storefront is this morning, but the design intention is to do a 2-step. That's a good point, Chip. It's an excellent point. So the first step is the storefront, which would be back, depending on where we end up, 1 foot to 3 feet. And then above that, I believe that's a 10-foot setback on both sides. And we did explore your idea of putting a window on the corner of the building across the street, the red brick one, and it just wasn't practical, but we can put a blank or a blind window if you like. We can do that on both sides. Personally, I like a blank brick wall, but we can modify anything you like. I'm here to say, if you want to change anything on this design, I'm pretty much authorized to say we'll do it, in terms of shifts like that. But I think you can see on both sides of the street, there was an attempt to pull back from what originally was a rather relentless tunnel of storefront, which was just us trying to maximize the rentable, usable footage. And that was a bad thing to do. And so now you have much more of what I would call a naturally occurring street front. And if you remember, this is the landlord's vision of it. And then the tenant's vision is, well, I wanted to paint my door that color, or I wanted to put, this kind of awning up on the building.
Yeah.
And
so Walter, I just want to make clear, I'm not making an evaluation of this design in my comments and my questions right now. I'm only asking questions because I want the commission and the public to understand what the design intent is. So that's the nature of my questions.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just trying to answer. I didn't.
Yeah.
Mean
I talk to it, and please do answer, particularly that thought about in this elevation, which is across the street, you have a different massing of pushback front to back, and I think that that's successful. But we don't see the variation in the roof line, the materials, the windows, in the same type of variation that you've used on the opposite side of the street, on the 76 side. And so could you address that and why
Yes.
why is that? What you're thinking is in that?
And I'm really, I'm smiling because it's like, I really appreciate that question, because I have thought about this a lot. And I worried about what the attempt was to make 2 very distinct building typologies in a way that would complement each other spatially. What I was worried about, honestly, I'm just going to pour my soul out, on the west side of the street, it's almost Disney-esque in terms of the attempt to create variety, but that is deliberate because it backs up to a residential neighborhood. And we're trying everything we can. And obviously it's like J. Edgar Hoover in a tutu, you can fix him up, but it's big. It is big. We're making it feel less big on that side. on this side, it's backs up to a railroad. We intend to do, hopefully, eventually, all respect to the planning board, we do not have any plans at the moment to do so, but eventually some more buildings. And so just grabbing typologies out of a grab bag. You probably see some familiar faces from Warren Street on the far side of the street with a little bit of the train depot embedded in the top left-hand corner. This is like a big pocketbook factory. It's a big brick mass. And Chip, you said something that I disagreed with, but it really forced me to think. This idea of the graduated windows, I went over and looked at that building in Catskill on the river, which has everything to do with this building, I think. And it's just a big brick box with some, to use your word, handsomely proportioned windows and a big roof. And I think it's brilliant. And I think we can get away with doing this if my co-architects get the right brick color and the sun hits us in the right way. And I'm going to shut up now, but you know, we've worked very hard to get that depot done and it's not perfect, but I want you to look at the depot and think about the fact that we're trying to build a building behind the depot. And I believe we've succeeded with the depot. And I believe if you give us a chance, we'll succeed with this. That's the end of my speech.
Terrific. Thank you, Walter.
Shall I turn it over to Jason Anderson so we can get more specific about materials? Are there any other questions for Walter? Ready to go? Okay.
Go for it.
All right.
Jason?
Well, my name is Jason Anderson, architect with ADG Architects, and I will share my screen. Bear with me 1 second. And we'll pick up right where Walter left off. So here we are, 76 North 7th Street. So what I'm hoping to talk about is the material selection that we did, really in this Parisian style, I'd say, building with our mansard roof. So if we start at the top and work our way down, what we've selected at the very top here, the roof is a standing seam, a black standing seam. So that would be above, and then we've got the mansard section here. I know last meeting we discussed, or we didn't discuss, but it was discussed, some synthetic slate, and that's what we're proposing here as well. So a black synthetic resin Belfort slate by Da Vinci. And so that's in the documents that were submitted. So that would be the, I'll call it the face of the mansard roof there. Then we've got our windows, as Walter mentioned. We've adjusted the proportions of those windows. We are looking to do those as aluminum clad wood. And so the proportions are about 3'6" wide, 3'6" wide by 6'6" high. So they've got a head height of about 8 feet inside the room. And then they drop down to 1'6" above the finished floor. And then we've got precast lintels above and a sill shown there as well. So they're all uniform going around the building. And the cornice up at the top here, we're looking to do that as a painted material. For maintenance, we're looking to do that as a PVC type material, so an AZEK or a FIPON type material. And that's really here at the top. But then as we get down towards the storefront section, we want to transition that to natural wood, but painted as well. So essentially everything will be painted so that we can maintain a similar look, so no one will be able to see the difference. But the one that will require more maintenance, of course, is along the lower section where the storefront is. In addition, as Walter mentioned, we're looking to, we brought the brick all the way down, and we're looking to create some canopies, some canvas canopies that go over some of the storefront units, individualize it a little bit for whatever the specific tenant is. We've got the different colors here to try to sort of break up that facade. In addition, as you're looking, we mentioned there about the massing. So really this section here and here, they sort of project out right towards the street. These two sections, this one in the center, this one over to the left side, they step back. But something to note, which was brought up on the building across the street, this storefront section here, as well as this section, still is, while it's stepped back from these two wings, we'll call it, it still stands proud about 3 feet from the residential units above. So there is some variation there in that facade as it goes around. We selected a few different colors here of brick. I'll zoom in a little bit. So we have a Bellcrest 700, which is shown here, and that's for what's shown as the red. So I'll zoom in a little bit more, Bellcrest 700. In addition, for the sections of brick that are around the storefront that are in the step back portions, you'll see that we selected the metallic black antique colonial to create a little bit of variation again. And we're hoping that plays off the painted wood as well as we create those more individualized streetscapes there. The one thing we're struggling, this building we're working through the construction documents now, working through trying to develop details, which alluded to with the conversation there with Craig. Some of the difficulties we're having though is we're using real brick, right? So we're really trying to stay true all the way, with the building, but we're struggling a bit to even meet the minimum requirements of the energy code with that. So one of the things that we wanted to present today that we've done successfully, this is a view from State Street, right? So the brewery is in front of us here, is we're looking to see if in the sections that are not along the alley and not directly adjacent to Railroad Avenue and not, basically have, and not along North 7th, but to transition to an EFS potentially. So what we selected here, this Drive It Winter Brown, is an EFS color that would match the Bellcrest Red 700. And so what we're looking to see if we could do is, let me go to this section. So here's a site plan showing the building. Is essentially the red section here, which is either step back or hidden by landscape, would primarily be the EFS. Would be something we're proposing. And then the rest of this would be real brick as it's adjacent to the streets. So that's something we wanted to discuss as well as far as our approach that would make it much easier as we're starting to try to specify things and still meet the bare minimum requirements. But that's pretty much, I think, all of the material elements that we have on this building or that we're proposing. So if there's any questions or comments.
One question about the roof and the mansard level. You show here two different colors, and is that your plan to use different colors of the synthetic slate?
No,
So no, that's just to represent the depth. So this, you're referring to this right
Yes.
here versus that. No, that's just to show the depth. It's meant to be all the same color.
Question or thought, Walter had mentioned very well the concept of aging. New construction is difficult for starters, very difficult to pull off in an historic district and maintain compatibility with the neighborhood. How do each of these materials fit in with that notion of what Walter described as folks walking down the street and not being the least bit conscious of newness? And I'm not familiar with EFS. That's a synthetic material.
Yeah, it's a stucco. It's stucco. It's over insulated. It's over insulation, but essentially in your mind, it'd be like a pebble spread stucco.
So it'll visually present as stucco, not brick?
Correct.
Can you show us that facade again, please?
Absolutely.
so just to comment, those bricks that he's got a picture of, they're not square. They've got nice little knockouts. You see that?
Yeah.
See, they don't look like a perfect, school brick wall. They look like an old brick wall, and that's the brick we're using.
Right. And that's where that was part of what I was going to mention was the approach on the brick was to to have something that is already aged essentially. So it's not clean and sharp. And so that's really for both of those. And that's what those images do show, as well as the painted material along the bottom. Painted wood very quickly is going to age and start to be repainted and have gather that appearance.
Usually we have to explain how they're not going to suddenly look old the minute you build
No, I
it.
understand. Was there any further consideration or discussion among you guys about the fenestration? I just want to reflect back on some prior conversations. I think, Walter, you had said that you'd advocated very strongly for the uniformity of the windows to capture what occurs often, maybe not always in kind of industrial feeling structures. I don't know if I got that right. And
Yeah.
I think there was a point made by Chip, or a thought or a suggestion, that to create I don't know what the word is. This is not my field, but a sense of quality of that this is deluxe. Was there consideration of upscaling the size of the window openings?
Do you mean, did
Bigger.
we upscale them from 4 feet to 6 feet? Yes, we did.
Okay.
In other words, these are post upscale would be my answer. And again, I would reference everybody who wants to go to Catskill, to go out on the bridge over Catskill Creek and look back at the Borland building. There was a nice article in the paper about it. A bunch of really boring 2/2 windows and absolutely identical openings with a kind of funky roof. I have a feeling a friend of mine was the architect, and it's just a dream of a building and looks like an old industrial building that somebody fixed up. And my hope, not to be too strident about it, is, that every building doesn't look like every other building. We have big and medium and small. And I think this one we could get away with because the bricks, really, honestly, the strategy here, let's be upfront about it, is money up front to get the best bricks we can on the street and on the side, and then do stucco on the back where you're going to see it from across the parking lot of the Register Star building. There's no view, from anywhere there. So, again, I think we're trying. That's all I can say. We're trying. But
Okay, thank you for the clarification on the windows, Walter. I was not clear that this had been upscaled, if you will, to 6 feet.
Yeah, and to that point of the fenestration, they're actually 6'6". So just picture in your mind, 8 foot is where the starting point is inside, right? And then it drops 6'6". So that's tall window.
And if I can just say, because, I think this is important, if you look at old buildings, the size of the windows almost tells you what they did. If they were big, it was a factory. If they were not as big, it was a rich person's house. If they were tiny, it's either a prison or a poor person's house. So these are rich people's windows, and we're proud of it.
Thanks very much, Walter. Unless it's an insane asylum, which I think was 12/12.
No comment.
Just saying. Folks who have not weighed in, please. It's really, really important that everyone on the commission jump in, thoughts, questions. It's all good.
Look, I think the ultimate truth here is simply the scale, right? And to move the scale back results in the loss of units, apparently a material number of units. And so I think that doesn't serve the public good of Hudson. That said, we're here for historic preservation, and I would say, that's my opinion, that Walter and team have done as sensitive a job as is possible given the scale of this building. And this is going to transform Hudson. I'm concerned about that, but the citizens of Hudson have already spoken about the scale through the Planning Commission. So I think we should continue to be diligent, continue to pay attention to details as Chip leads us in so doing, and and look forward to something that will enrich a district, even at the cost of, even at the cost of some history and definitely at the cost of some community scale, no doubt, within the historic district, but with the potential opportunity for a revitalized part of town with housing that's desperately needed, my opinion.
Thanks, John.
Do I wish
Hugh?
it, I mean, I'll be candid, do I wish it was a floor shorter? Yeah, for sure.
I do too. Hugh?
You know, I concur with much of what John just said. You know, no doubt that the team that is involved in this project is incredibly talented, experienced, and, you know, aware of all of the various points that need to be addressed, you know. But, you know, what I'm looking at and where we are, I think that you couldn't be more sensitive in what is trying to be achieved. And again, yes, could it be a floor shorter? Yes. Could the windows, you know, be different? Possibly. But all in all, I think it's a great project. And it's a necessary project, and it will help people. And I think that is, as you know, as much as we're trying to maintain certain historic details of Hudson and not take buildings down, and that is not our purpose, you know, we have to incorporate all of the everything involved, and helping people and having affordable housing and revitalizing a part of town is incredibly important, especially at this point in time. So I think this is a great project.
Paul, Barrett?
Yeah, first of all, I want to say, you know, to, you know, Beth and Dan and Jason and Walter and, you know, anyone else who has spoken this morning, this has been really very enlightening. I just want to remind the commission, though, that one of the ultimate considerations of any historic preservation commission is the subject of demolishing historic structures in a district. You know, and Phil pointed out earlier that the subject of demolition is not an isolated request. It runs in tandem with the proposal of what will replace it. And this is what we're looking at right now. And we just have to keep asking ourselves, is it appropriate? And does it complement, you know, the neighborhood that surrounds it? You know, I'm really interested in reading that alternatives analysis document first before I comment anymore. But thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Miranda?
I agree with virtually everything that's been said. I think I want to compliment this process, actually. I think that the architects of these buildings have been very responsive to comments from the Historic Preservation Commission, and the result has been continuing improvements in the building. I think that rather than building, you know, ersatz copies of old buildings, I think these buildings incorporate elements that are appropriate for the city of Hudson. The mansard roof, for example, there are a number of important buildings in Hudson that have mansard roofs. It's part of our architectural vocabulary, if you like. This particular building does have an industrial feeling to it, but it's not so far from the pocketbook factory. Hudson has an industrial history, but I think the fact that the facade is broken up really helps to keep it from being too massive. I agree with those who've said, you know, it'd be nice if it could be a story shorter, but then that would be less housing, which is very much needed. And another important element of the community of Hudson is the diversity of our population. And these buildings will ensure going forward, whatever happens on the south side of town with all its fancy hotels and breweries and so on, that this will continue to be a community that welcomes people of a range of economic backgrounds, which I think is very, very important. So all in all, could one quibble about this or that or the other? I don't love the idea of stucco on the back, but I appreciate that it may help with certainly with the cost of the buildings and also with the energy efficiency of them. So I feel that this has been a really good process that's led to buildings that ultimately carry forward Hudson's history in a good way.
Thanks very much, Miranda. Anyone on the commission who has not spoken or has further questions for the applicant?
I have another question.
Sure.
The west side of 67, the building on 67 at 67. That site plan is very useful right now because it would be like to see what the relationship is between the rear of this building, which is 5 stories on 7th Street. Does it become 6 stories on the rear property line? And what are the adjacent homes that face 6th Street, their relative scale and relationship to this? I'm sure you've shown us the elevation of that. It'd be nice if we could see that again.
Yeah, I think
Sure.
that's great.
So it does not go to 6 stories anywhere in the rear. And maybe is this a good point for us to transition to George Chang, who can provide a full overview of the materials recommended for this building? Would you like to hear from him now?
I'd really like to ask, what is the relationship between
So I can answer that. I understand what you're getting at. I think it's useful to look at the plan in the lower left-hand corner, and you see the building has been broken up to 2 bars, so that the experience for the people at the back, Chip, is similar to somebody living behind, let's say, I keep wanting to call it the Opera House, but you know what I mean, on Warren Street. That's an enormous pedimented building, which this may bear more than a passing resemblance to. Again, we have little Lily Putnam floor to floor ratios. I don't know how tall that building is, but somebody's got a beautiful little brick structure right across the street from the back of that. And I think it would be similar, you know.
Understood. Although there's of course not an alley behind this. Could you show us that rear elevation?
This Chip, Walter.
Can you, why don't we let George screen share? This is a great segue to George. George is the actual architect of that building, Chip. So we'll put him on the hot seat now and he can answer.
Sorry about that. I didn't know where I was driving.
So George,
as you speak, please remark about the distance off of the property line in the back. And much of this question comes up relative to the use of the ephes or the synthetic stucco on the back side of the other building. Are you proposing using that also on the back of this building?
George is going to answer that very question, hopefully well. George, can you share your screen?
Sure, give me 1 second.
Okay. So Chip, I don't have a site plan in front of me. I can tell you it's a minimum of 20-foot separation from the property line. George now can tell you everything else.
All right. Everyone able to see my screen?
Yes, it's up.
Okay.
75 North 7th.
Great. So I believe most folks have already seen this presentation in terms of the materials being proposed. So let me just do a quick introduction. My name is George Chang, and I'm a principal at Urban Architectural Initiatives, architect for 75 North 7th. And UAI is a architectural practice with a focus on multifamily residential, affordable and supportive housing, as well as community facility buildings designed to meet high performance energy standards. So 75 North 7th is a project that applied and was awarded a NYSERDA Buildings of Excellence grant back in 2019. And as part of that NYSERDA BOE award, Galvin and UAI we were committing to designing and obtaining FIAS certification for an all-electric passive house building that with the idea that it being used as a model for future multifamily residential developments. And what that means is that we're creating a super insulated, airtight building with triple glazed windows, energy recovery ventilators with the intent to reduce energy usage by between 50 to 75% as compared to conventional design and construction standards. So we're also proposing to install PV solar panels for on-site power generation, which will feed into the grid to further help reduce energy costs for this development. So in our initial facade material studies, we looked at various cladding options. And I think for this presentation, I'm primarily focused on the brick. I think the roof, what we're presenting for the roof is fairly self-explanatory. It'll be, we're looking to clad the roof with standing seam metal panels, and those can vary in color, depending on the bulk it sits on. The windows, as we said, there'll be triple glazed windows. We're deciding whether it'll be a UPVC or a fiberglass or wood with aluminum clad wood, but essentially it'll be a painted finish from the exterior. As we come to the ground floor, the storefront is primarily it'll be metal paneling over the column areas, and again, we're looking to make sure that these storefront elements are all energy efficient. So in our initial material facade studies, we looked at various cladding, exterior wall cladding options that responded to the historic context of both the broader city of Hudson, and then more specifically the Depot District. So primarily through the use of brick. We looked at first at full depth 4-inch thick brick used in a cavity wall assembly, but shelf angles and masonry ties, as I'm sure you're aware, creates major issues with thermal bridging, and for our passive house and our passive house consultant determined that it was really not viable for creating a FIAS certified building. We then looked at thin brick options that would be adhered to the building's exterior insulation layer, but the state funding agency, HCR, doesn't allow the use of thin brick on their projects that they fund as outlined in their design guidelines. So we did reach out to HCR, their technical review staff, to request a design waiver to allow for the use of thin brick, but unfortunately we were denied. So with both full brick or full depth brick and thin brick options off the table, well, we needed to look at a creative approach to still create the appearance of brick. And so we looked at and explored insulated brick options. So I'm going to share my flip over to. So this is an insulated brick sample, and I can show you this insulated brick sample was created based on a actual brick sample that was provided to the manufacturer, to this new brick manufacturer, to essentially replicate. So this is the new brick. This is the insulated brick. And this is the brick sample that it was modeled after. So this is a Watsontown brick. It's modular size, and you can see that they're virtually the same. So I can do a side by side if that's helpful. Okay. So yeah, we had to, we actually did have to get samples for both to ensure that to see how closely the new brick replicated the existing, and we found that we were actually very surprised how good it looks. Obviously we were very skeptical, but I think and you guys can deliberate and see it yourselves, but I think it's a pretty good match.
What is the material of the new brick?
So the new brick, it's essentially it's insulation, rigid insulation that's formed and then faced with like a stucco finish, but then made to look and so the texture is made to look like brick. And I can actually show you, this is like their cell sheet.
Sorry, George, they're laid in as individual bricks, aren't they? So they would have
Correct.
order added after, so it's not a glue on, scratch out thing.
Correct. So this is the product's cell sheet, and you can see this on highlighted in blue is the actual brick samples that different architects select and then tell that the new brick manufacturer to replicate. So you can see this is the in the highlighted in blue is actual brick, and then you can see highlighted in red, those are the new brick samples. And as you can see that they also have various different finishes as well as different effects. So they can be flashed, they can look like there's an iron spot or both, right? And so, and these are examples of other buildings where they either had to replace, reclad, or match an existing brick. So this is a before and after. And I think that, you can see that even on the after shot, it would be very difficult to tell the difference, to tell that this was not real brick.
And we're not proposing a blend or jumbo brick.
Correct. It would be a standard modular size brick. So we're not looking to do a blend. This is just from the manufacturer, their sample or examples of what they've done on other projects. Okay. So
excuse me, do I understand it's a 4-inch deep brick?
No, it's actually not a 4-inch deep brick. Here, let me see if let me pull I have a physical sample. Give me 1 second. I don't know if you guys can, I'll stop sharing for a second. And if you can see this. So this is the profile of this insulated brick. And maybe, hold on, give me 1 second. Let me not blur my background. So it's installed essentially, and these are just different colors you'll see, and different finishes, but they're unitized, right? And they're installed, depending on however we want to course them, right? Could be a running bond, could be, third running bond. And what happens is that once they're all laid, then actual mortar, which again, we can select whatever color mortar we want, that's then, grouted into the joints. So for us, what we're actually proposing to do is to actually do real brick at the ground floor or wherever there is high, pedestrian traffic, because we do want the durability of real brick at the ground floor and essentially on the first and cellar floors. This will help to make sure that, people, are, it could take a little bit more abuse than the insulated brick. And then above the first floor, we would transition to that insulated brick. And because they're going to be right next to each other, right? We do want to make sure that it's pretty seamless in terms of that transition and the look of the materials.
George,
Yes.
Phil, I'm just this. I'm a little startled by this, but our experience with materials, and we spend a lot of time talking to builders and property owners about material, is that much of the marketing for example, vinyl and aluminum clad siding, as over the fullness of time shows up as what it is, which is marketing. The materials were hyped as better, cheaper, faster, and in fact they delaminate, the colors fade, and so on. And what folks are told was a great deal and preferable to wood siding, less maintenance, etc. After 20 years or so, turns out not to be true. I'm trying to understand. I understand what you're saying about the aesthetics. I'm trying to understand, and there may be no answer to this, how the quality of that first blush aesthetics coming off the factory and being mortared into place. What is their experience with the sustainability of this product?
You mean sustainability in terms of
Looks,
okay.
looks, and everything that goes with that. All materials deteriorate in one way or another, but some less than others. Brick is a very familiar building material in Hudson. We know a lot about it. We know what it looks like. We know how it relates to other structures in the community. Are we taking an unnecessary risk with the, look, all we've got to work with at this point are the external materials, to some degree, the setbacks and the fenestration. There may be, but there's not a huge vocabulary. If we want to fulfill our commitment of appropriateness with old buildings, it's sort of a straight up matter of understanding the period, the original design, the detail, what's next door, and so on. With new buildings, all you got going for you is some sense of authenticity. Are we losing that with this stuff?
To be honest, I personally don't believe so. I think that and obviously I 100% respect and sensitive to HPC's concerns. I think that we also have to take into consideration that climate change is it's a real thing, right? It's forcing us to rethink how we design and build and the materials we use. I think that we have to be able to balance both those things, right? We have to balance what the concerns of HPC as well as the real concerns of how do we make this building energy efficient? How do we make it aesthetically pleasing? So I think I agree that any material that we put on any building requires maintenance, requires upkeep, whether it's brick, whether it's ephes, whether it's stucco, wood, metal panels, whatever it is, right? It requires maintenance. This is not any different.
Well, I'd just like to say, I think this is so fascinating because if we we're just going to do a stucco and just take a nice EFIS application, I think a lot of people would feel that was not the right thing to do because the texture isn't right. It doesn't look like Hudson. I go by the Father Gigante houses in the Bronx every time I go on the Bruckner Expressway. Those are traditional architectural forms, housing from the early 20th century that were covered in a kind of almost masonry colored reddish stucco. And from the Bruckner, they're quite effective, but then if you walked up to them, you'd say, well, there's not enough texture. So the question is, how do you make a modern energy efficient building? And I want to digress for a second, because if you all think about what we've been trying to do here and look at this morning, and then imagine the typical new apartment building in New York City. It's got large areas of glass that don't have mullions. It's covered in stucco or some sort of synthetic wood that's been printed. The technology has gone somewhere other than where we want it to go. And I'm on board with this attempt, no matter how horrified some of you are, because I think this actually has potential and it solves a problem. And, I'm sorry, I've already apologized for wanting to treat things a little bit like a stage set. I think this is an example where that's appropriate. So that's, something to think about in the mix.
And I think
I would ask, what are our choices, right? Like this, if we're evaluating the appropriateness of this material, what would we be pitching it against? What other new construction material, which by the way is something that we don't often deal with before us, right? Like, chip, et cetera. What else would you consider if we were to not view this as appropriate?
Well,
I would be concerned about the durability of this product in freeze thaw cycles. And as Phil outlined, not just products like vinyl siding that get sold. There are energy products that get sold. I think it's incumbent upon the applicant to show that there's a product here that's durable and won't deteriorate. And I would have serious reservations about ever using this product on anything, but just consider the head joint, if you will, the vertical joint that's illustrated in the panel on the left. If that is, you showed the overlapping of the of the bricks on the horizontal joint, but the vertical joint appears to have the raw foam behind a very thin veneer of basically paint, that then is going to be mortared in with a field applied mortar. And the freeze thaw cycle on that, I would think, could be very destructive in very short order. I would recommend that. And I'm all good on, I understand the architectural and I appreciate the architectural approach of balancing a traditional form with a new technology. But I think that one of the things that we have in Hudson, in all of our buildings, is there is an authenticity to our buildings. A brick building really is a brick building, and a wood building really is a wood building. And I think that I would encourage you to look at a genuinely authentic material that provides the super insulation that you're wanting to achieve, and has a good maintenance cycle, and has some real architectural interest that has durability. I don't think that while you have massed this building and this complex into the thought of the brick industrial tradition of Hudson. I understand that. We all understand that. I don't think that necessarily means that your siding solution has to be brick. It could be something that is frank, modern, and also has the hand assembled, for instance, might have the hand assembled technique of a brick building. When we looked at the build, you showed us the building across the street that has a worn patinaed brick, hand laid 4 inches thick. That's going to have the irregularity of a hand assembled product over a large surface. Boy, that just has an awful lot of appeal for consistency and for everything that Walter described it as. I just don't see this achieving that same appeal.
What would
Thank you for that.
what would happen if this building were not necessarily? I understand that the format was to not be intentionally disruptive in the streetscape or et cetera. But for me personally, I would accept disruption over lack of authenticity.
I also wonder the concern that's been raised about how this material will weather. I don't know if it's been in existence long enough to really know, but I appreciate your idea of using real brick on the ground floor so that pedestrians walking by see a brick structure, and then having this material above it. And then across the street is a large building that's made of real brick. What happens in 10 years when it begins to weather and this new material looks very different from the building across the street and the first floor of this building?
You're putting energy on the table, which is cool. We hadn't discussed it in the context of this project. From our point of view, the lead horses were compatibility and authenticity. And you want to throw another horse in the game and say, okay, energy, cool. But then something's got to give. I want to keep authenticity is what I'm trying to say. And if you want to try a material that is not brick, so that we're not pretending to be something we ain't, I would be very interested in that.
So
one consideration, I just want to pose a question, and we understand the value of authenticity, and you don't want something to look like it's pretending to be something that it isn't.
Right.
One factor though is, we want 75 North 7th and 76 North 7th to have a relationship.
Yeah.
And, we're sensitive about 75 North 7th being, the publicly financed.
Ms.
Sorry,
Goff, can you mute,
Christabel,
please?
please mute.
Christabel? Better. Thank you. I'm sorry, Dan. Go ahead.
So to say it briefly, we don't want 75 North 7th to stand out. And, we thought about, a more modern application. It would certainly be a lot more straightforward from a constructability perspective than, carefully inlaying each of these individual insulated bricks. But we were sensitive to the fact that, we're creating this mixed income neighborhood that has two buildings with differences in their income mixes. So if we're looking at changing 75 North 7th, do you also want us to look at changing 76 North 7th to be something that
It's
doesn't have that issue with authenticity?
It's not that I want you to change it.
Okay.
I'm trying to tell you, I am deeply troubled by styrofoam brick or whatever the hell it is. And I understand that when it's a new baby and comes out of the box, it's adorable and it looks like its cousin brick. I'm not a believer. It's just a statement of concern. I'm not trying to push you into a solution you don't want. But you threw a new horse into the game. We thought we had our hands full already with some demo, some authenticity, some scale, and so on. And I was just beginning to breathe again when I heard my colleague say some complimentary stuff about the first structure we were looking at. I said, damn, we're good. And now you got a new dog in the race called Energy, fine, great dog, and some synthetic material. I'm just trying to work through it, Dan.
I completely understand. And I must say, like, George kind of walked through the process of how we got here. We wanted to do regular brick on this. It wasn't until we got site plan approval and we started meeting with our passive house consultant that we realized it wasn't viable for getting that passive house certification. So we're really trying to be creative here, and we're trying to balance energy and the one goal of this project, which is to push forward sustainability in multifamily buildings. We want to balance that with having something that you all are happy with and that fits within the neighborhood. So I'm wondering, would it be helpful if we came back with more information on durability?
Yes.
I know they've done testing. I know we can provide more detailed information on what it means for maintenance and what the actual durability of this product is. Because I have to say, when George first told me about using some insulated brick product on this building, I said, no way, no one's going to go for this. It's not going to happen. We need to do something else. But I have the samples at my desk at the office. They are surprisingly convincing. So I'd love just to provide more information, and if we could all just kind of learn a little bit more about this product and evaluate whether or not it indeed not only meets the energy efficiency goals, but will continue to look as nice as it does now in the future, because that's important to us too.
Dan, what happens if we say that that we want authenticity? What happens if you're asserting a new priority, which absolutely you're right to? What if we don't agree with that priority? What if we say that it's not right for Hudson? What happens with this energy efficiency horse you put into the race?
Excuse me, let me just say that, Phil, I think that we can achieve, and the architects can achieve both things. It's not one or the other. I think that the energy, I think that the approach to energy is extremely valuable for this building. And I think we want to encourage super insulated buildings. The fact that you're using triple glazing and photovoltaic cells on the roof is, I think, really good. And I think that, though, I think that what we have, very simply, Phil, and I agree with you, I think that this synthetic brick is very questionable. So I think we just simply ask the applicant to explore some other options for us here. I think that, and what you said, Phil, was very good. You're leaning toward authenticity more than you are leaning toward maybe something else. Well, let's explore these other options. Let's have the team explore some other possibilities. I think one of the things that the architects should know that are new to, maybe more new to us, we have very much tried to ask architects to bring us their best work. We've asked for architects to push the envelope.
Let me know if
and so my appeal to George would be, hey, this is this is very interesting. It's challenging. Let's look at some other things. Bring us some other things. Spin your wheel, put some thought into something new and innovative, because I think we'd be supportive of something that we haven't seen yet.
Thanks, Chip. That's very helpful to me. And you're right. I didn't mean to go on a and I wasn't trying to be anti-environment. I'm just struggling. We have very few tools to work with. To me, authenticity has to be one of the North Stars.
I mean, I think we should go back to Miranda's point, right? The appropriateness of this material for an historic district. It's the same test we would use on a single family proposing some non-traditional material. But that said, the scale matters, environmentalism certainly matters. And I think, but if this, we're not just giving a certificate of appropriateness for the moment it goes up, but if there are durability questions, then we will have authorized something that is not appropriate for the short, the medium and long term. So, and if it looks, I mean, frankly, if it looks cheap when it's up there, that's a different, that's also not appropriate. And I'm not saying that it would, but I think it's a great question by Phil, Chip, Miranda. What's the case for this being appropriate for the historic district? And what's the alternative if we determine it is not?
John, how did you feel what Chip was saying before in terms of it sounds good unless you're carrying that rock on your shoulders, but be creative. Look at something else that we haven't looked at? Are you good with that?
I'm sure that's a very hard problem for Walter.
Very.
Right? In other words, Walter submitted a design that that we have blessed as appropriate based on the concept of materials. And, I think it's very, very, if he changes all the brick to clapboard, I imagine he has to go back to the drawing board. So I think the ideal solution would be that we can become convinced so much as we can that this material works. Secondarily, that if that doesn't work, something that resembles this, that doesn't compromise Walter's design, can be found that has a greater track record or forecast for reliability and durability. That's all. And aesthetic, because if miles of this go up, it's not going to help them. It's not going to help the massing. And and Walter, to your point, I'm sure you think about this all the time, but you don't want to build something that everyone's going to hate in 15 years. It will not make you or this developer or any of us heroes. And if it deteriorates, or if it looks crappy from day one, this is not going to be well reflected.
I agree with everything everybody's said. The dilemma is, and Phil said it, it's energy is another issue that's been thrown into this mix, and we're all struggling with it. So I think the challenge is to go back to the drawing board and find something better. And we'll either do that or put a sample up on City Hall, glue it right on the marble, and ask you guys to come and take a look at it and see what you think.
Is the physical material? Well, we can sort that out offline logistically. I'd like to touch and feel and sniff this thing, but
we're hoping it's going to be so far up in the building that you'd never have the opportunity to do that. My goal is to put a sample about 20 feet up in the air and not provide you with a ladder, because in all seriousness, this is a question. How far away does it matter? I think the points made about the material, the airsat's nature, it's all good. We'll look for a solution. If we can't find one, we'll come back to you with our hat in our hands and some samples.
Should we look at the other materials on the facade of this building before we go away, or are you comfortable that everything else is authentic and will work?
George?
So I think let me share my screen again. So I think that the brick was really the main concern. So our initial plan was to again provide real brick at the ground floor and wherever it's accessible to pedestrian traffic, and then essentially match that brick going up. So these would be essentially the brick, or more or less the brick samples that we would look to model off of for the insulated brick.
I understand.
What about the structure on the right-hand side of this image? What is the facade of that made of?
So this would also be brick or insulated brick. So it would be brick at the ground floor, actual brick at the ground floor, and then we would do insulated brick above.
George, put it another way. The finishes on this building the same. Hold aside the insulated brick. Are all of the other finishes the identical materials that are being used on the other building?
Yeah, basically. The windows, except for the windows, those will be triple glazed. We're going to see if we can get it from the same manufacturer.
Okay.
But essentially triple glazed versus a double glazed.
But the fenestration, comparable, the scale of the windows, all that other good stuff?
Yes.
Okay.
Can I ask a question? And this seems so, I apologize if this is so remedial. Is there an example of a large scale building where this material has been used? We don't want to picture. How long has this been in production? Where is there an example of it in the vicinity? And what's the age and size of that construction? Like I
can definitely go to the.
I would ask the manufacturer that this
Absolutely.
is a lot of this. I mean, to Chip's concern, if this goes badly, that will be terrible. And while we want to, and while we ensure, we want to, while that you can argue that that's the problem of the owner of the building, it is not. It would become quickly Hudson's problem. So I think that seeing what this looks like in a few years on a building would be great.
So we've reached out to the manufacturer. We're still waiting for them to provide information about where this is installed, especially in the Hudson Valley. So we should be getting that information back hopefully early next week. And then we can also provide testing data because they do stress test these materials, and they do indicate that, at least from the literature that they provided, that it does perform in certain, in climate zones up to climate zone 5.
So
another question is this I don't know, right? This is Belden brand, right? Like I know nothing about this. Is there, how many brands of this type of material are there? Is this the number one material like that? Is this equivalent, is this equivalent to like a Marvin Heritage window? Like what do we know about, there must be multiple manufacturers of this type of siding, and what do we know about this one versus others? This is a question we've like never asked before because no one's ever shown it to us.
So for the new brick product, we've looked at other comparable materials that is, that's insulation with a brick finish. And by far, this is the most convincing one. I'll be honest, there are others that completely fail to, as a design professional, I'll be very honest, I would not put something in front of you guys if I didn't believe that it was convincing, right? I'm not going to put something, I'm not trying to waste our time or your time, proposing something that we cannot ourselves accept.
So George, I think John was asking about the Belden brick.
The Belden.
Yeah, that's
John. Because that's what I see. I have no idea what this is.
So just for clarity,
Belden brick. The Belden brick is the actual brick. I'm actually
correct.
asking about the siding. I don't think the actual brick is in. I assume that y'all know what you've chosen the best brick there. I'm really talking about the siding that's a concern.
Yeah, the Belden brick, that's there for the color reference. So when you purchase the new brick, you specify the exact brick product that you want them to mimic. So This is really to give you a sense of the color palette that would be achieved through the new brick.
So I have a kind of generic question that this drawing that he has up is very useful, because here you see it not as texture, but just as color tones. So I'm just asking, point of discussion, the ground floor and the floors that look like the darker brick, if we were able to somehow do that in brick and the rest in stucco, a white stucco, a red stucco, that was convincing, and we then kind of fixed the stucco. So I'm serious about this. So it looks like an old building, you know, that they kind of stuccoed. Then we might accidentally achieve the very effect I've been struggling from the beginning of the project. In other words, why not put real brick on the lower part and just stucco the top and get the color right and not worry about texture?
I think, Walter, that concept is the kind of concept that you applied on the other side of the street, whereby you were buying a better brick on the front side and save with the money that you were saving with the stucco on the backside. I'm not a real fan of EPIS, and I think that, however, there are places where it is very useful and very valuable. There's no doubt about it. I think the argument that you've made about the visibility of the rear of that building is something that we should study more to make sure that, in fact, that's the case. And I'm not proposing that you find EPIS as the solution here, but the exercise that you just went through here is the kind of exercise that I was trying to reference earlier. And that's, let's think out of the box. Let's try to come up with some genuine materials, and let's think about the decorative and ornamental aspects of breaking down this massing into interesting architectural parts so that we achieve the kind of architectural vitality that we have throughout the rest of the community. So, you know, maybe to that end, one's able to use a combination of a less expensive, highly efficient insulated material. Maybe it's EPIS, maybe it's something else, with brick, with stone, with some other products. So I would say you're right on to the idea of exploring it. I'd personally like to see more exploration with less EPIS of the possible materials that could be used, and the increasing of quality of materials on the street level, which you've already addressed. I think that's a perfectly valid approach.
Great. I think we'll touch base with our passive house consultants and get a full sense of what our palette is here and what kind of options we have, and we'll be happy to come back and outline what alternatives would look like. Well, at the same time, getting you some hard data on the durability of this new brick product, and maybe there are some design strategies we can use to help to mitigate the risk that it ages at a different rate than the brick.
Yes.
So one thing I would want to just say again, putting the new brick adjacent to real brick strikes me as problematic, because they are going to wear differently.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at the right side of this, which has 2 stories of that buff colored stone or brick. Having one story be real brick and the other story be some other material strikes me as a really not a good idea.
But we could use those color changes to change material where the color changes. So that's a breakthrough. I think that's a really great idea.
I would say one other thing about the wire cut concept of the brick. Walter pointed out that the soft edges of the brick used on the other side. Wire cut brick I associate very strongly with 1960, 1970, really inexpensive kind of bad buildings. And I think that the wire cut texture is kind of problematic, even if we're using original, 4-inch brick. would you, I would like for you to address, please, if you would go back to the previous elevation, the windows in this building. On the other side of the street, you're using a 2/2 double hung window, I think. What are you using here? Oh, I see.
Yeah,
I couldn't-
we're varying it to, to again, with the concept of breaking up the mass, we're looking at, varying breaking up dividing in the light. So you
Okay.
can see we have a 2/2 here.
We
and-
can't, there we go. Okay. And
All right.
so are these casement windows not double hung?
There'll be some kind of projected windows that, at least these will be, they'll all be projected windows, whether it be casement or awning or hopper. But this one, I think we can at least simulate to make it look like a double hung.
Oh, okay. When you say a projected window, you're talking about an awning window, a hopper window, or a
Correct.
casement window?
Correct.
Something
We're
different.
we haven't finalized how it will be
Right.
operated.
Right. I might other, while you have this image up right now, point out the decorative, you can leave it there.
Oh.
You can leave it there. The decorative panel, the spandrel panel between the windows on the right-hand side of this image.
Mhm.
These spandrel panels are those framed panels that are between the two windows with the vertical accent that you have on either side of the window. Those vertical panels become an opportunity for quality of material, ornamentation, attractiveness of construction, and materiality that we see throughout Hudson. So I'd ask you to attend to those as great potential to add quality of material and design to the building. I realize now, of course, it's just a line drawing, but I think your intention is to try to create an ornamental pattern or an ornamental panel, or not, I don't mean ornamental in a decorative way, but something that has a materiality that is attractive.
Absolutely.
I think it's important and could be an important part of your overall composition, whereby you use maybe a more efficient, less expensive surface and counterbalance that with a quality of that panel. Just a suggestion. I am very interested still in looking at the back of this building and thinking about how it relates to the single-family homes that are on that adjoin it on 6th Street. I think that this is, we've spent a lot of time talking about the street front on 7th Street. And I'd really like for you, and maybe we're too far into this meeting today for you to fully address this, but when you come back, if not now, I'd really like for you to discuss how is this building relating to those single family homes on 6th Street. Walter commented about the massing of it, and I think that that's an excellent I think it's an excellent comment, Walter, that you made about it. I just want to have this same discussion about the materiality and the windows and the features that exist on that.
George, do you have that elevation, the one looking west?
Yeah, I have to go dig it up. 1 second. It's not in this PDF.
I mean, while he's looking for that, I would just comment that this is an example of the front and the back virtually being identical, because the building is seen from all directions. And so the thought, I think the most menacing, if that's the right term, would be the white building projecting closest to the property line. And hopefully that is narrow enough, as you'll see.
This is an older set, but
Yeah.
let me see. I think it should be
Yeah, it's
represented
fine.
here.
Fine.
Oh, that's a section through.
Okay, maybe if you don't have it, I can.
Well, and it's not important that we necessarily talk about it right now. I'm not sure how long our meeting goes today. but again, it's an important feature for us to discuss when we're discussing the exterior finishes of the building.
Okay, I think we can better prep for that discussion at a future meeting.
Okay,
And then we would probably want to put an elevation, at least the outline of the houses on 6th Street, George, to show him where they are. And I just want to mention that a good friend of mine bought one of those houses 2 weeks ago, fully aware that there's going to be a large looming building behind him. So at least one of the neighbors has no complaints when we get to that.
yeah, large looming was not the phrase you wanted to use, Walter.
No, I'm being upfront about it. You know, this town is full of large looming structures, and I'm very fond of them. The pocketbook factory is rather large and looming.
Walter, this guy's a good friend, you said?
Yep. You want me to get him on to testify that he'd really purchased the building last Friday?
Not necessary.
I warned him. I told him.
Yeah.
So that's really, I think, everything on our end. I feel like we have pretty clear requests for information from the commission. And I just want to say I really appreciate everyone's creative feedback and openness to what we're trying to achieve here. We're really trying to achieve a number of different objectives with this project and balance them all appropriately. So thank you all for working through that with us. It's not been easy for the design team or the development team, and your insight and input is very helpful as we try to balance these priorities.
Thanks very much, Dan. Good. Will you guys will get back to me when you want to meet again? And Craig, please touch base with Craig after this and make sure that things that were not addressed in this discussion, but he still needs for his process get addressed. I'm not saying that very well, but if you would please follow up with Craig.
I would just say, I think this is great. And just a point, and I don't mean this seriously, but several people said, oh, I wish it was a story shorter. If that became an issue, then of course, whatever we had taken to Craig would be moot. So we had submitted, I believe, the material to Craig for review, and we can change it, but it just seems for everybody's benefit, for this committee, which is the gatekeeper, you're going to be more exacting than Craig to make sure we've addressed concerns.
All right, I just want to be sure we're all in the same loop. We don't miss a beat. And look, the purpose was to work together to move this project forward. As I said right up front, that's the whole deal. Get a complete application so that we're in a position to vote. For God's sake, that's it. And we're all working on the same path. So that's a good thing.
That's helpful. Yeah. Well, we appreciate the overview of the requirements for an application being considered complete. So we'll be sending a full package to Craig and to the board, not just with our application, but also with the additional information that's been requested today.
That would be super. Thanks so much, Dan. So I want to break at that point. I did promise something. I may live to regret it. But we try in this commission to have people speak. It's what we do. It's through the dialectic that solutions get discovered. Given that structurally the mayor is my boss, if he's still there, I would ask Mayor Johnson, because glad he's here, if he wanted to make any comments.
I am here, and I want to thank everybody for being as detailed you are with this process. I would just, hope that we can make a decision, soon. And that's, all I got to say. But it was great learning about all of this throughout this meeting.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Mayor Johnson. Anybody else who wants to make a point, or if not so much, then I would ask that we adjourn. I had put on the agenda that we were going to try to do certified local government discussion today, but
We don't have Jeremy today, and I think he has an opinion on that. We should say that.
pardon?
We don't have Jeremy, and I thought he was working on that with you and had an opinion.
He's not here today. I just want to get it on the agenda for the next meeting. Michael is part of that group too. He has been pushing us to get it done. It's important we get it done. We'll get it on the agenda next time.
So, Chairman, I just want to say for everyone that I believe the next meeting is going to be in person.
Oh, good point.
So we're likely to meet in person on June, I think it's the 10th.
I believe that we have a public hearing on that date as well for the new construction that we looked at on First Street and Cherry Alley.
Mhm.
We do. So there's going to be a public hearing at the next meeting, and so on. We'll figure our way through.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks all.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend.
Thanks, everyone.